University in Washington. Welcome to the Kojo Show, connecting your neighborhood with the world. Ian Svenonius lives for making art in Washington, D.C., noisy, sarcastic, radical art. From the days he burst through the D.C.'s punk scene with the band Nation of Ulysses to all the rock and roll he's played with bands in between, like the group he makes music with now, Chain and the Gang. All the way to the work he's done as an author and an interview show host, he's remained a fixture in the city that inspires him, where by all accounts, it's getting harder and harder for people who want to make art like this. Devitalize this city. Ian joins us in studio. Ian Zanonius is a musician, author, and artist based in Washington. He's performed with a number of bands, including Chain and the Gang, Nation of Ulysses, the Makeup Cupid Car Club, Weird War, and Felt Letters. Ian, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for bringing me on the show.
Thank you for letting me come back.
Welcome back.
Thank you back, Ali. Ali Schweitzer is the editor of WMU 885's digital music project. It's called Bandwidth. You can join us by calling 800 433 8850. You think Washington, D.C. is a perfect place for artists? Why or why not? 800 433 8850. In this place where you've been making art for decades, is anything but a static place. Some neighborhoods hardly resemble what they were when you first started playing rock and roll here. One mayoral candidate launched a campaign for office from a pricey French restaurant on 14th Street during the last election, citing it as a symbol of progress. But in this song that we just heard, you're singing about revitalizing the city. What did you mean, and what does it say about the place where you've been making your art?
Well, if you think about city, city has a certain there's different ideas of what a city is supposed to constitute, and I guess for you know I grew up in an era when cities were sort of more open to there were cheaper
take the things that are vital out of the city and make it no longer recognizable as the city that you used to know that you were.
That's right. And I think the reaction to the song, and this is something that E and I have talked about before, was you had people who were saying, yeah, so Chain and the Gang, I'm totally behind this. Everybody kind of recognized that it was from people who liked it, recognized it from this perspective. But then you had on the other side people saying, now why would you want to go back to where we were before? Why do you want to devitalize the city now? Do you think that's a realistic policy proposal? And Ian's response to that was basically, well, those people don't understand rock and roll.
Yes, it's rock and roll. How would you describe, Ian, how these changes to the city, for instance, have influenced your art and what you feel you need to say through your art? Because I hear it loudly, clearly, but other people think that, well, it's not exactly the kind of political argument that you should be making.
Um, well, it's interesting because if you think about Washington D.C., I mean, the song that really comes to mind when you think about Washington D.C. is Chocolate City by Parliament, which
Correct.
was a big. It was a big song because it was essentially saying that it was talking about demographics and you know you know migration of people, or as almost like a military campaign. You think about Chocolate City. In Chocolate City, George Clinton says, "Now we've got Newark. We've got So he's talking about like this thing, like he's Napoleon or something, and he's moving the troops or whatever. And if you live in Washington D.C. and you see traumatic changes that have nothing to do with kind of democratic consensus, it has everything to do with money and speculation, and you can't help but see it as kind of war, like it feels like a war. And
Why do you stay? What keeps you here? Why not just move?
I have a lot of records. Hard to move.
Why not move to LA or New York where you might actually see more commercial success?
Well, I came out of this community, Discord Records, DC Punk, and so I definitely have a connection to the city and to to a certain community and constituency. But obviously, like you said, the place is anything but static, and at a certain point, you do look around you and say, "Well, I guess my city moved away from me."
I was going to ask you about that because you've been in the scene for so many generations. You've seen, so many of your ex-bandmates have gone on to do, very normal, boring things like have families and move out to the suburbs and things like that. Could you ever see yourself doing something like that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I don't believe you.
But more like it's like, does it really matter where you live? Like in a lot of in if you are a musician, hopefully you're traveling and working with different people all over. So
Right, and you've been all over the world.
yeah, and I just have I think in America you're considered kind of a loser if you haven't moved 3 times by the time you're 25.
True,
Exactly.
very true.
There's this but so, and that seems weird to me.
But I think how you stay vital to the city is by staying. I mean, that's what Chuck Brown did. You identify this city by Chuck. You identify this city by Ian. Some people even identify the city by yours truly because I've been here.
That's right. Yes.
So long you
right.
stay. Speaking of the digital age, you did a song with Felt Letters called 600,000 Bands, in which you get into just how many bands and artists are always competing for our attention. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, 600,000 bands. Each one makes a sound. Well, everybody wants you to listen to that, but you can't right now, cause you're listening to this. 600,000 bands, yeah. Beat the stones in the dam. Some other ones at home for various reasons. No one knows why or when. Yeah, 600,000 fans. 600,000 fans. 600,000 fans. 600,000 fans. 600,000 fans. Yeah, 50,000 sound like can. 50,000 sound like man for man. I'm starting one like I'm cool in the gang, yeah.
What do you make of how music is now so accessible in this digital world we live in, and how that affects what art we have access to, what audiences that artists have access to? You can't listen to 600,000 bands these days.
It's overwhelming. It's difficult, and it's I mean, the thing about music though is there's always been a lot of people making music, and through when corporations kind of controlled the message, there was this kind of fake genealogy that grew up, and that posited that, oh well, they're this and then this happened, but really it's more like chaos. And I think there's always been 600,000 bands.
I didn't realize that fully until I was reading some of the things you talked about. When I was listening to Otis Redding, I was growing up in Guyana, South America, and as far as I was concerned, he was Atlantic's only artist. That was it.
Yeah.
Atlantic had Otis Redding. That was it.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Turns out there were thousands.
Yeah, thousands. And all those groups were constantly, mutating. And I mean, it's actually interesting because I think the cool thing about, like I listen to a lot of old music, and, when you think about, rock and roll in the beginning, it really was independent labels, and it was constantly in flux. And then, with the Beatles invasion, things got very consolidated because the corporations finally figured out how to, take control of it, and they kind of crushed the independent labels, and that's when they, were able to really control the message. Like, these are the things. So yeah, when I was young and trying to get into soul music, it was like Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
James Brown.
That was it.
But yeah, and so you have to keep excavating, and more that the old message is just, it doesn't hold any water, or the old, history.
You've also written a lot about bands that, in your book, for example, in Supernatural Strategies for Making a Rock and Roll Group, you talk a lot about how there need to be rules for bands. They need to follow certain, I mean, you're not entirely serious when you talk about how strict these rules are, but rules like, okay, if you're in a band, you need to identify yourself as a member of this band. You need to own this band as your thing at all times. If your band is not a type of band that would wear tennis shoes, for example, don't be seen in public wearing tennis shoes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important for bands to follow certain rules?
Consistency. Yeah, well, because it's not, you're not playing a role as an actor. You're not an actor, and people don't like, actor bands. Like Juliette Lewis's group was a flop because she's not believable, because there's something about the band that's supposed to be, there's supposed to be something authentic about the group, and but the group is a paradox because it's absolutely inauthentic. It's like a absurd exposition of insanity and kind of, neurotic, feelings and, things like that. That's what you want, but at the same time, you don't want to feel like your group is just a bunch of actors, or, your favorite group. Yeah, it's not a play. It's not actors. You have to live it. And I think that's because the origins of the rock group are really, it has these kind of, gangland origins. Essentially, I think rock groups are an extension of what used to, permeate the cities of America, these gangs, and that's why they have names that are like gangs and they look like gangs, and, that whole idea. It's like and I think there's something about, there's some tribal, it's like Looking for Records is like an extension of
hunter-gatherer instincts, looking for berries in the woods or something, that's the same kind of thing. You're identifying, oh, well, this one's going to be good, this one's going to be poison. So I think the group has a similar look.
In case you're just joining us, our guest is Ian Svenonius. He is a musician, author, and artist based in Washington, D.C., who's performed with a number of bands, including Chain and the Gang, of Ulysses, The Makeup, Cupid Car Club, Weird War, and Felt Letters. He's joined in studio by Ali Schweitzer. She is the editor of WMU's digital music project Bandwidth. Here is Alex in Southeast Washington. Alex, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Much big fan of the show. Ian, this is Alex from the Fridge Gallery. How are you doing?
Hey, Alex, how's it going?
I picked up your book the other night at Fringe, The Supernatural, and I guess my generic question is just about your use of sarcasm. And I guess the previous person there just asked you kind of about that, but that was kind of what I just wanted to hear about. And I get it. I've been a fan forever. So I was really impressed with the book too, by the way.
Thanks.
What inspired you to write the book?
Well, there's a lot of groups now, or rather, there's a lot of groups now that are coming out of this kind of rock camp thing. Once upon a time, a rock group was a kind of, was a degenerate activity. But now it's being cultivated by the parents, who send their children to a rock camp to learn how to do it, just like Stevie Ray Vaughan or something, and because of this, the groups are of higher quality than ever on a like in a certain sense. But what's missing, I think, is maybe the ideological underpinning that informed a lot of the old groups, or this kind of, the idea that, I don't know, these other ideas, everybody's learning how to stand on stage and they know how to, it took my first group years just to figure out how to do anything. But now I think people know, even when they're, they're learning when they're 9, 10 years old. So, but what's missing maybe is some kind of like the other things that make the art form or medium interesting.
So
like
this caller who is asking about sarcasm, and I wanted to ask you about, just to follow up on what you were talking about, having a philosophy or an attitude that defines your band. Your band, every band that you've been in seems to be about a perspective and an attitude, right? And the person talking about your sarcasm, that seems just, I wouldn't necessarily call it sarcasm the way that you write about music. I wouldn't say you're a sarcastic person, but you do think that it's important to have a perspective in all of your music, right? That's a big part of what you do.
I do. I mean, like early rock and roll was really, I think, informed by Mad Magazine. It was is satirical. Early rock and roll is basically satirical. It's, it was like pornography, bubblegum. It was like just, it was disgusting, like Mad Magazine. Then folk music was kind of sucked up by the, it kind of collided with rock music, and then rock was suddenly informed by political values and kind of idealism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all our ideas, rock and roll ideas of authenticity come in, where we're obsessed with whether a group is authentic and stuff like that. And or selling out. That's a term from folk, because folk music was actually a covert, it was like communism covert, in America. Obviously there were reactionaries in folk like Burl Ives, but there was a lot, like mostly it was fellow travelers, people who weren't going to declare themselves overtly as socialistic in a McCarthy era, but they're essentially promoting equality and like things like that, communist ideas like equality. So anyway, so when folk and rock and roll become collide, then you have these ideological ideas, and that finally expresses itself in punk or whatever, and we're still living through the aftermath of punk, and
Got to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ian Svenonius. He is a musician, author, and artist based here in Washington, D.C. If you have questions or comments for Ian, give us a call at 800-433-8850. What concerns do you have about the D.C. region's ability to support a creative class and those who want to make art here? What do you make of the current state of rock and roll? 800-433-8850. I'm Kojo Nandi.
You're the one called bubble gum. Yeah, you just look good for a minute or two.
Welcome back. Our guest is Ian Svenonius. He is a musician, author, and artist. He's based here in Washington, who's performed with a number of bands, including Chain and the Gang, Nation of Ulysses, The Makeup, Cupid Car Club, Weird War, and Felt Feathers. Also in studio with us is Ali Schweitzer. She's the editor of WAMU 885's digital music project, which is called Bandwidth. Your second album with Chain and the Gang was called Music's Not for Everyone. Who are you trying to make art or music for?
Well, I don't know if they exist yet, you know.
They'll come to you. You've tried reaching different people with your different projects. Does your idea of who your audience is change depending on who you're making music with?
Oh wait, I'm sorry, what's the question?
Does your idea of music change depending on who you're making music with? Because you've been in a lot of bands. How do you know when you want to do something new, or that it's time for the band that you've been playing with to like shut it down?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that you know, if you get a little success, then you probably want to shut it down, really, you know, because with success comes this kind of, you know, self-satisfaction. You're just gonna I don't know, your values become perverted. I'm inspired by you know, the surrealists who had a rule that they weren't allowed to sell any art, you know, and their pope, you know, Andre Breton, you know, he once you know, he would hit the members with a cane, or they'd have a tribunal and expel them publicly from the group, you know, if they broke the rules. So I'm really inspired by this kind of you know, modernism and those old groups that essentially base themselves on the Communist Party, like on a organizational level. I think that's interesting. But no, at a certain point, you know, yeah, you don't want complacency to you know, once complacency settles in and you're you know, I don't know, like, yeah, you have to think about, well, what are we, if you're not inspired anymore. And I think that lots of times maybe success like it just, I don't know, it makes people a little,
Makes you comfortable, makes you less creative in your view?
or just you're thinking about the wrong things, you know.
How do you feel starting Chain and the Gang as opposed to when you first started Nation of Ulysses? Has it ever stopped being exciting? How was the experience of your past bands? How did that affect your approach to starting newer ones?
Well, Nation of Ulysses is just a very organic situation where I'd had the idea for a long time. It was more of a, this idea of an organization. It was, and it was very informed by the time. Public Enemy was one of our favorite groups. We were also into, these kind of, I was really reading a lot of Marinetti and, the Futurist Manifesto, things like that. So we were interested in, organizations like exclusive organizations like the Nation of Islam. Like I've always been inspired by the fact that as a Caucasian, if a Nation of Islam person is selling the Final Call on the side of the road, they won't sell it to me. I think that's great. I don't think everybody should be allowed to be part of everything,
Was it Nation of Ulysses that declared itself a political party?
Yes, it was.
So tell me about that. Why did you take that approach?
Because, the rock group at the time, we were, the Sub Pop had started, and there was a kind of return in punk to kind of good old boy rock and roll aesthetic. We weren't big fans of, Mudhoney or Nirvana. I mean, now I like those bands fine, but at the time they seemed really, anathema to what our idea of, music should be. It should be this more disciplined, stark thing of,
We've been talking about Nation of Ulysses, so let's listen to Nation of Ulysses.
He's on all around, on every porch in his town. Just out of thing, young and explore perfection on demand. With sugar tea comes that thing, the boss with me got sugar tea. Comes that thing, raise your voice to the chorus with me, sing it up. Spectrasonic sound, spectrasonic sound, spectrasonic sound. Lift the ball in the round, don't lay like a crowd.
Do you see yourself as a role model sometimes, as a guide maybe?
That's a great question.
No, not really. Maybe a style guide. I definitely think sartorially I could be a guide, but
Yep.
maybe not ideologically. No, but but back to the so Nation of Ulysses was it was very organic, whereas Chain and the Gang was
Your current band.
more considered. It was more considered like, oh, we're going to have this thing that's essentially based on the idea of a gang in, these kind of big gangs like the White Fence or the Slousen gang that were like tons of members with, a loose membership and this kind of people coming and going, So that was a very different thing. Whereas like, maybe Nation of Ulysses was based on, some kind of Algerian terrorist cell, where your membership was absolute.
Let's stay with that Algerian terrorist cell for a minute, because that's what Mart in Washington, D.C. wants to talk about. Mart, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I actually used to see Nation of Ulysses at Food for Thought.
Wow.
Way back in the day. And I actually met his father, who I think it is, who was a mathematical audition up at University of Maryland.
Yes, that's right.
And, I was talking about grad school and stuff like that. And then I actually saw Parliament Funkadelic, who was opened by a small band called Chuck Brown down at 930 Club one time. And actually, I can even buy the Nation of the Final Call. Even I'm white, too. But they'll sell it to me now.
Oh wow. Well,
Not
But
back
the
in the
thing
day.
is,
you must
that
have.
Nation of Ulysses band was so loud. Whatever.
Yeah, we were a little too loud. I mean, I don't like that kind of volume anymore.
Yeah, no,
I'm more
I was
tender.
very impressed. I just thought they had to get rid of that lead singer screaming.
Yeah, good. That would have been good for everybody.
No. Anyway, I
Mark.
was wondering what happened to that group, or whether Svenonius and such.
Yeah. Well, they broke up.
Went the way of
They
all
broke
flesh.
up. Exactly.
Thank you for your call,
It's
Mark.
good to hear from you.
Here's Ross in Washington, D.C. Hi, Ross. Your turn.
Hello. Hi, Ian.
Hey,
I just
Ross.
wanted to ask you about, so I read your book, and I was reading it on the street in Tacoma Park and eating some ice cream, and some people next to me were getting some ice cream. And as I was reading it about these band camps, the guy next to me was talking about forming a Christian band camp. And so just it really struck me as like this form of the band has been so co-opted. Why do you start new bands when it seems like the whole medium seems to have been co-opted and kind of perverted and maybe in the wrong direction?
Well, because it's really the ultimate art form, because it's cheap enough. Anybody can afford to do it. Rock and roll is so open. There's no rules. Anything can be rock and roll. You don't even need to play an instrument. You doo-wop bands just mumbled. And and it's the ultimate art form because it combines performance and static art, the record cover, and you can make a video, and it's it's just, it has everything. Film pretends to be the ultimate, the Gesamtkunstwerk, but it's really not, because it's not really affordable to anybody, and it doesn't. I don't know. Film is good too. I love film, but rock and roll, that's the ultimate art form, and that's why it's so. It's everybody wants to do it. Look at Kevin Bacon or Bill Clinton. They all want to be part of it.
You said that rock and roll has no rules, but obviously you've said the opposite many times in print, and now you have this fall a book coming out that takes a similarly hard line. It's called Censorship Now.
Censorship Now. Yes.
Can you talk about censorship now?
Well, if you look at the free press, this is. I think emotionally, everybody will agree with me. Everybody's been indoctrinated with this idea that censorship is un-American. Actually, there used to be a bumper sticker: censorship is un-American. Well, in that case, let's have some censorship, because if we have a free press that promotes war in Iraq and intervention in Ukraine and Syria, and the free press, the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN, don't have any culpability at the end of the day after mass murder, then we need some censorship. We need a people's censorship.
And that applies to art as well.
Yes, art is the linchpin. Art, the idea that art is this inconsequential thing where anybody can say anything, is an incredible insult to artists. And any artist who is anti-censorship is waving a white flag. They're saying my art is inconsequential.
Got to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be continuing our conversation with Ian Svenonius. He is also a talk show host. We'll be talking about him a little bit more in that role. You know him better, maybe as a musician, author, and artist. And Ali Schweitzer, editor of our digital music project, Bandwidth, here at WAMU 88.5. You can still call us at 800-433-8850. What do you make of the current state of rock and roll? Are there artists making rock and roll music in the Washington region who inspire you? And if so, who are they? Have you ever played in a band? How did you find the partners to play with? And when did you know it was time to call it quits or to try something new? You can shoot us a tweet at Kojo Show. I'm Kojo Nandi.
Oh, hi. I'm Ian Svenonius. Welcome to Soft Focus, in which I, the interviewer, bring you, the viewer, through the most intimate thoughts of today's most dynamic performers. I'll be talking to
DC United goes stadium shopping in Virginia. Plus, some say performance-enhancing drugs have ruined baseball. We find out why many fear they'll do the same for horse racing. Today at 1 on the Kojo Namdi Show on WAMU 88.5 and streaming at kojoshow.org. Ali Schweitzer joins me in studio. She's the editor of WMU 88.5's digital musical project Bandwidth. And we're both talking with Ian I mess up your name every time. Svenonius. He is a musician and author and artist based in Washington who's performed with a number of bands. You can go to our website, kojoshow.org, and watch the live video stream of this broadcast there. One of the other places, Ian, you've taken your character, your persona over the years has been to the role of interview show host. Let's take a listen to you kicking off one of the installments of your online interview show. It's called Soft Focus.
Oh, hi. I'm Ian Svenonius. Welcome to Soft Focus, in which I, the interviewer, bring you, the viewer, through the most intimate thoughts of today's most dynamic performers. I'll be talking to that special cast of noisemakers who create rock and roll, this country's most ubiquitous music form. Although this workforce is often seen on stage or in the highly stylized video format, we're rarely privy to their motivations. They're reduced to the caricature of the primitive, the idiot, or the wild man. Is this because they have nothing to say? Soft Focus will find out.
What are you most interested in learning and talking about when you interview other artists, Ian?
Good question. I don't know.
The creative process, what makes them do what they do or how they do it?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. Or, I just like maybe the philosophy that they, when you're in a group, you're, at least once upon a time, you were interviewed a lot and asked, and there was this kind of holdover from the John Lennon era, where you're supposed to have sort of the secret to the universe. And
you're supposed to have profound thoughts.
Right. Now it's not so much. Now I think chefs are they're the people who
they're the thinkers.
Hold forth. Yeah. But anyway, people of a certain, like Billy Childish, he just talks really well, especially the English, because they all came from this art school tradition. So people like Billy Childish or, Marky Smith or Terry Hall, they were, very, they're just good raconteurs, or not raconteurs, but, just, they always had good bon mots. And, Ian MacKay, he's a good, he's like that, he's in that mold. But, there's lots, not just, there's lots of new, you know.
Allie, what are you looking for when you talk to an artist?
I'm one of those music writers that really doesn't care so much about the composition as much as the person in the story. And I've gotten complaints about that actually from readers and artists who are tired of reading about things like cultural ideas and philosophy, and they want to read about the actual way that music is made. I mean, you're one of my favorite interview subjects because you pretty much seem the philosophy, your ideology, is such a huge part of who you are. And like when I saw you play with Chain and the Gang at Capitol Fringe Memorial Day weekend, it was really about, I would say 50% sermon and 50% rock show. So I'm always interested in artists similar to Ian who just have something to say. I don't really care that much about how they wrote the song. That's just my perspective.
I feel the same way. I like the personality. It's kind of like, people, like bands are people, and you can meet a lot of people, and certain personalities appeal to you, and it's really like groups are pretty similar to one another in a lot of ways, but the personality is what comes out.
You recently put out a new album with Chain and the Gang. It's called Minimum Rock and Roll. What room do you see for rock and roll in the culture that pervades so much of the country right now? How would you diagnose, if you will, the health of rock and roll? I'd like to hear your ideas about that.
What the health of rock and roll? That's a good question. I don't, it's not. I don't think, there used to be a lot of fear about the music disappearing. Even from the very beginning, there were protestations about rock and roll. Rock and roll will never die. Rock and roll is here to stay. Like this is not a trend. It's not a passing phase. At this point, it's like 50, 60 years into it. And it doesn't seem like it's going to go anywhere. But what happens is it changes a lot. And a lot of ways that it changes, we're kind of unaware until we can see it afterwards. So, for example, music in the 90s, if you listen to it, like the groups in the underground that were very influential, Stereolab, John Spencer, Blues Explosion, the bands like that, what you notice is this kind of lack of formalism. Bands from the 80s were, shocking and, provocative in a way that groups never would be now. And now groups are very formalistic. There's a real formalism that people are obsessed with. And that has a lot to do, everything has to do, obviously, with the medium through which people listen to the music. So now we're back to this kind of thing. It reminds me of music from the early 60s or late 50s, where the music has to make its case in a few seconds or it's done, and that is, for me, I like short songs, so it's okay, but it's definitely had a massive effect, this thing where people are auditing music all the time on the computer. It's a lot like the old 45s.
We're going to get some more of that in a second. You have said that it's important to have some kind of sophomoric prejudices against certain art forms. Can I explain away my feelings about disco using that phrase? Is that okay?
Well, disco is good music. But I understand, like, a lot of times when a music form, presents itself and we can't, it does, it feels, it offends us because of the way that it's presented to us. But maybe, I think you should reconsider disco because the good stuff.
At least I admit that my feelings are sophomoric.
Oh yeah.
Here is Robin in Bethesda, Maryland. Robin, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello there. I would like to get Ian's take on the DIY scene in DC. My son, who's 18, and his band have had a lot of success. They have a band.
Is your son now on a 40-city cross-country tour?
Yes, he is, and they have 40 dates in these DIY sort of house show locate venues.
What band is it?
Really fun. They're called the Obsessives.
Oh, of course.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know them?
Yeah, I know about the Obsessives. Aren't they a pop punk band?
Allie knows everything.
they call themselves pop punk alt emo. They're very teen angst, really good lyrics, I think. But I'm just curious about this scene. So many neat bands have come out of it, and is it healthy in DC and elsewhere? So thank you for knowing them.
Yeah. Well,
My God.
I don't know because, I mean, yeah, it seems like a lot of stuff is going on, but,
Well, you're a
I
big
don't
part of
know.
the quote unquote DIY scene. I mean, you're fundamentally pretty DIY.
I can't see it. I can't see it. I'm in the center of the storm.
You can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. No, I don't know. I mean, yeah, things have gone things have really, gone back to the basement, and that's might be good or bad. I don't know, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff happening. A lot of people are making groups despite the despite this oppressive new class who's permeating DC.
And you talked about also I think the quote that I read on your publisher's website was the gentrification of punk rock by indie rock. What does that mean briefly?
Well, basically, that was an essay that I wrote. It's called "The End of College Rock and Indie Rock's Gentrification of Punk." Now, what the thesis or my idea behind that is that essentially there used to be these tiers of rock and roll. There was your Bruce Springsteens and Motley Crue's, and then there was this kind of college rock, these college rock groups, and they were played on college radio. And then there was punk, which was perverse and had this hatred of everything that it had adopted from gay filmmakers like John Waters, this kind of so there were these different tiers, and then indie rock, when college rock was destroyed by NPR, then punk was kind of appropriate, punk was sort of the kind of punk economy and everything was sort of adopted by what would have been college rock bands, which became the indie bands, and it's just talking about this indie thing, where did indie come from, and what's what is that, and so that was the idea of that.
Robin, thank you very much for your call. There's several aspects of what you do that we haven't explored. You've written books, you even made a movie. What is a group? What do these kinds of projects do for you that performing and writing music doesn't?
Well, I think everything, has its place, and a rock show just can't do a lot of things that, even though I said it was the ultimate art form, it can't do certain things. Or you don't want it to, like when you listen to a person like, certain people, they write too many lyrics and you're like, well, maybe this has no place in a rock and roll song, this many lyrics. Like a rock and roll song they can have that many lyrics, but is it good? So I think that an essay is a better way to, if you want to get, a little more deep into an idea.
Here's Warren in Alexandria, Virginia. Warren, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hey, Kojo, great show. Thank you. Ian, I have a quick question. Everyone talks about how talented you are, and you are super talented. But my question is, what is your knack for surrounding yourself with similarly talented people, like in all your bands, Nations of Ulysses, Scene Creamers, Weird War, and the rest?
That is my talent, actually. So thanks for recognizing that. I mean, George Clinton, in his new memoir that just came out, he talks about the importance of, finding talented people to help you and, and allowing them to express themselves. So that's really my main thing, is actually finding these people and giving them a certain, amount of freedom, because, you see a lot of these martinets and they find, I'm not like that. I'm just, I find some people and let them do their thing, and
a bit of a talent scout.
Exactly.
Here's Ellen in Rockville, Maryland. Ellen, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I've been fascinated by everything you've been saying, and I've been curious about your position on ska.
Ska. I did not expect this question.
And also, there's going to be at the AFI Silver Spring Theater on the 13th, Saturday, Legends of Ska movie, which definitely check out. I'll hang up and listen on the air. Thank you.
Well, ska, I don't know. Ska, ska was is a revival. There was the early ska music was supposedly very influenced by country music that was coming in on Armed Forces radio. So, the Armed Forces, the military, our country is just a military machine, let's face it. And in a lot of ways, rock and roll there's a lot of ties to the military. I think I explore that in my book, Supernatural Strategies for Making a Rock and Roll Group. And one aspect is that, in the 50s, there was a universal conscription, and a lot of the rock and roll stars were psychologically deranged by their affiliation with the military, which is a organization which should be abolished.
And for a final statement, I think that we'll have to stand for the time being because we're out of time.
That was a good place to
Ian Svenonius is a musician, author, and artist. He's based in Washington, D.C. He's performed in a number of bands. Ian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ali Schweitzer is the editor of WMU 88.5's Digital Music Project Bandwidth. Ali, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Nand.
I heard you getting like
Coming up tomorrow on the Politics Hour, Virginians head to the polls next week for state and local primaries. D.C. officials weigh in on the Pepco-Exelon merger, and the field for a congressional seat in Maryland gets more crowded. The Politics